Welcome. Okay, so you've sent over some really thought-provoking sources. We've been digging into them, especially this idea of satisfaction when it comes to discrimination.
Yeah, it's a tricky concept.
It really is. And, exploring that led us straight to something, well, much bigger, didn't it? This basic human thing of creating the other.
Absolutely. It's kind of fascinating how all those sources converge on that. It's this universal pattern, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, our mission here today is to untack this othering thing, just like your sources lay it out.
And see how it helps us understand discrimination, right?
Yeah.
Like a shortcut through the complexity.
Exactly. A direct path, hopefully breaking down a really, really intricate issue.
Okay, let's get right to it then. Othering.
Yeah.
What exactly are we talking about here? Your sources have this AI definition.
Yeah, that one's pretty useful. Basically, your sources frame it as a mental process. You perceive someone or whole group as fundamentally different from you, from your group.
In-group.
Right. And crucially, it usually involves slapping negative stereotypes onto that outgroup.
Which is where it gets problematic, obviously. But this isn't new, is it? The sources suggest it goes way back, maybe even to our survival instincts.
That's a really good point. If you think about early human groups, maybe distinguishing us from them was, helpful for survival.
How so? Like protecting resources, sticking together.
Yeah, exactly. Knowing who was not part of your tribe could have been an advantage. Basic safety, resource management, that kind of thing.
So a basic us versus them that maybe worked back then, but, and this is a key point the sources make, it takes a really dark turn when it becomes dehumanization.
Precisely. That jump from just noticing difference to stripping people of their humanity, pushing them to the edges based on stuff that's often completely arbitrary, that's where the real harm kicks in.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this, we need examples. Your sources provided a bunch, historical and current stuff we'd recognize.
Yeah, let's look at some. Makes it much clearer. Where should we start? Ancient history.
Sounds good. The Greeks and Romans you mentioned, calling people barbarians.
Right, and barbarian wasn't just like person from somewhere else. It was loaded. It meant they were inferior, less civilized, less intelligent.
Ah, so it defined the Greeks and Romans as civilized in contrast.
Exactly. And it made things like conquest seem, justified.
Yeah.
Dehumanizing through language. It's a classic tactic in othering.
And that pattern just keeps popping up, doesn't it? Religious conflicts, for example.
Yeah.
The Crusades. Persecution of Jewish people throughout history.
Oh, absolutely. Stark examples.
Yeah.
Religion becomes the dividing line. The other isn't just wrong. They're seen as, evil, a legitimate target.
It's chilling how beliefs can be twisted like that.
It really makes you think. How easily does difference become justification for hate?
And then racial and ethnic discrimination. I mean, the examples are horrific. The slave trade, the Holocaust, apartheid.
Devastating, and fundamentally built on that lie of racial superiority, right? Complete dehumanization to justify unthinkable cruelty. It's about power structures amplifying that othering instinct.
And the sources were clear. This isn't just ancient history. It's still happening, subtly and not so subtly.
Sadly, yes. Which brings us to other forms, like gender. The sources talked about how women have been othered for centuries.
Yeah, portrayed as less rational or suited only for certain roles.
Exactly. Framed as fundamentally different in ways that justified limiting their access to, everything. Education, jobs, political power.
And we still see echoes of that everywhere. What about ageism? That's one people don't always think about as othering.
Right. But the sources highlight it. Both the very young seen as, not having agency, and the elderly sometimes dismissed as irrelevant.
So they get marginalized too based on age. Limited opportunities. It's about how society assigns value, isn't it?
Definitely. And the list keeps going. Ableism. Othering people with disabilities.
Focusing on what people supposedly can't do rather than what they can. Leading to exclusion.
Yeah, exclusion from jobs, social life, even just getting around. Reinforcing that idea of being different and less than.
Then there's nationalism, xenophobia, othering anyone from outside.
And that often plays on fear, right? The foreigner as a threat to jobs, culture, security, which can fuel awful policies, even hate crimes.
And today, political polarization feels like it's off the charts. That's othering too, isn't it?
Or absolutely. Demonizing the other side. Not just disagreeing, but seeing them as morally bankrupt, dangerous even. It just shuts down any real conversation.
Totally. Okay, and finally, getting back to the start, discrimination against LGBTQ+ people. The sources link this directly to othering.
Yes, particularly transgender individuals. They're othered for not fitting neatly into traditional gender boxes, for deviating from that perceived norm.
And the consequences are brutal. Legal discrimination, stigma, violence, denial of basic rights.
Exactly. It's all part of the same damaging pattern.
Wow. Okay, laying it all out like that, it's heavy. So the sources then analyze these effects through different lenses, starting with history.
Yeah, looking at the big picture. History shows othering isn't just like a background thing. It drives conflict. It shapes how stories get told, often to justify oppression. The scars are deep.
Then biology and genetics. You'd think maybe there's some basis for division there, but the sources shoot that down pretty hard.
Completely. It's so important. Yes, there are variations, obviously, but othering blows tiny differences way out of proportion, assigns negative value where there isn't any.
No biological basis for one group being superior.
None whatsoever. And specifically on transgender people, the sources are crystal clear. Natural biological variations don't invalidate someone's gender identity, period.
That needs saying loud and clear. Okay, philosophically, what's the angle there?
Well, it clashes directly with ideas of universal human rights, doesn't it? The whole principle that everyone deserves dignity and respect just by being human. Othering fundamentally denies that.
So philosophical traditions that emphasize interconnectedness would argue against it.
Absolutely. Many traditions stress shared humanity, treating everyone with dignity. Othering is the antithesis of that.
Interesting. Even physics and math have analogies. Symmetry breaking.
Yeah, it's a cool metaphor. Think of equality as perfect symmetry. Othering is like deliberately breaking that symmetry, creating artificial divisions, hierarchies.
Like a force messing up the balance.
Kind of. And math concepts like categorization, set theory. Useful tools, but they can be misused in othering. You start assigning value judgments to the categories. In-group good, out-group bad.
And logically, the reasoning behind othering, it's flawed.
Oh, deeply flawed. It relies on stuff like stereotypes, which are just hasty generalizations, ignoring diversity within groups, and prejudice, literally prejudging. It bypasses any actual rational thought.
It seems tied into our state of mind, too. Fear, mistrust.
Totally. It's a vicious cycle. Fear feeds prejudice, prejudice justifies more othering. And for the person doing the discriminating, it can create this false sense of, security or superiority.
Which brings us straight to ethics. The sources are pretty unambiguous here.
Unwavering, really.
Yeah.
Ethically. Othering is just wrong. Full stop. It violates equality, justice, human dignity. Denying rights and opportunities based on group identity is indefensible.
So what does this do to people? The sources paint a grim picture of the impact.
For those being othered, it's devastating. We're talking psychological distress, anxiety, depression, feeling worthless, social isolation, major economic disadvantages, jobs, housing, education.
And even physical harm.
Yeah, tragically. Higher risk of hate speech, harassment, violence. It's incredibly damaging on every level.
And it affects others too, right? The people around.
Definitely. Witnessing it can cause, moral distress if you believe in fairness. Creates fear in the wider community too, especially for other targeted groups. It just tears at the social fabric.
How does the world react to all this? The sources said it's complicated.
Very. You see strong condemnation, activism, people fighting for change. You also see, apathy. Or worse, normalization. Sometimes discriminatory attitudes get baked right into laws and policies. It's a real mix.
So, given it's ethically wrong, what should we be doing? What's the imperative?
The sources say it's clear. We have to actively challenge it. Challenge the prejudice, promote understanding, work towards a society where everyone's treated equally, regardless of difference.
Okay, and how do we do that? The sources had some practical ideas for mitigating othering. Education and awareness seemed key.
Hugely important. Getting accurate information out there. Confronting stereotypes directly. And that has to include proper education about gender identity. Countering the misinformation about trans people.
And just bringing people together, intergroup contact.
Yeah, positive interaction between different groups can really break down those us versus them walls, build empathy.
Which leads to promoting empathy itself, right? Trying to see things from another perspective.
Exactly. Genuinely trying to understand someone else's experience. It humanizes the other, builds connection.
And it's not just about feelings. We need to actually challenge prejudice when we see it.
Yes, speaking out, even when it's uncomfortable. It helps shift the environment.
And laws matter, too. You mentioned the UK vote earlier. If that strengthens trans rights.
That would be a major step. Legal recognition sends a powerful message. But, as the sources wisely point out, laws aren't magic wands. Attitudes need to change, too.
Media representation plays a role.
Big time. Accurate, diverse portrayals in media help normalize different groups, fight stereotypes.
And the end goal is inclusive communities.
That's it. Creating places where everyone feels safe, valued, like they belong, and can participate fully.
Okay, let's circle back to those specific points you raised initially. The sources address them directly. First, that idea of satisfaction for discriminators.
Right, and the sources are clear. It's not real satisfaction. It's more like a negative thing, reinforcing their own group identity by putting others down. It's based on fear and bad information, a really warped sense of superiority.
Got it. And the UK vote connection to civilization.
The sources link progress on rights, like potentially strengthening trans rights to becoming a more civilized society, one that respects everyone's humanity. But they add that caution. Laws are just one piece. Real progress needs attitude shifts, too.
And the specific point about toilets.
Addressed head-on. Trans people use bathrooms for the exact same reasons as anyone else. The safety concerns. Based on stereotypes, no evidence, just unfounded fear being weaponized.
And finally, that point about historical nudity and anatomy.
Yeah, the sources use that to highlight how absurd it is to use anatomy to justify discrimination. We all share basic human anatomy, and history shows different norms. It really hammers home that gender identity is internal, separate from biology assigned at birth.
It all ties together. The sources even use logic to make the point.
Yeah, not like a math proof, but logical deduction. Premise 1. All humans have basic needs. Premise 2. Discrimination stops some groups meeting those needs equally. Conclusion. Therefore, discrimination is unjust. Simple, clear logic.
And they pointed out the bad logic used in othering.
Right. The fallacies. Like hasty generalizations, stereotypes.
Yeah.
Appealing to fear instead of reason, attacking the person instead of the argument, ad hominem. Spotting that bad logic is key to dismantling othering.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, what's the main takeaway from your sources?
I think the core insight is seeing discrimination against trans people not as some isolated thing, but as a current example of this very old, very human pattern of othering, a pattern that's harmed countless groups throughout history.
And understanding all the history, the psychology, the ethics, why is that so crucial?
Because if we don't get how othering works, how can we possibly build a better world? A world that's genuinely inclusive, where difference isn't a weapon, but just part of being human.
That's a really powerful note to end on. And for everyone listening, maybe something to chew on. Where do you see othering happening around you? Maybe even, unconsciously in yourself sometimes. Thinking about how challenging that impulse could actually lead to more understanding, more connection. And maybe consider how these ideas about othering apply to other divisions we see. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
This is DigitView.